Iowa fans, help me. You can save me from the Twitter space lord. Thank you so much for being here. We can talk Iowa football for the next hour right here at the Voice of College Football. And of course, I'm not referring to my friend here, Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm, just, more nonsense on social media. But we are looking forward to the conversation on Iowa football, as we always do with all of you and with Corey. Corey, how you doing?
I'm good. Mark, I've never been a part of a Twitter space. So I really don't even know what that means. I know it's a feature of Twitter, and I am on Twitter with my platform, but I have no idea what that is, and have never taken part in one.
If you are not aware of Twitter Space, I'm thinking that your future as a Twitter Space lord is rather limited.
Probably not going to achieve that type of a status, but
Yeah. All right, folks, leave those comments and questions here at the Voice of College Football, but we're going to dive into Iowa football talk with spring practice starting in just about a month. I always keep losing that date, but it's somewhere in mid-March, correct?
mid to late March. Yeah, I don't know that I have the official date. I'd have to go back. We looked at it last week, as far as the first day last year, and so it should align. I believe it's that first Monday of like the third week of March, something like that. So yeah, well, it'll be here before you know it, and I'm kind of enjoying the slower time. I know you, you and Nabisco had a little bit of a 2 to 3 hour.
Yeah, I don't know who won that battle.
How many did you end up eating last night? By the way,
34
did you feel
double
sick?
stuffed Oreos.
Did you feel sick?
I did. Right after I did. I'm thankful that I only felt sick I was on for 3 hours, and because of really not eating prior to that and a few other things, I as we've discussed, I can regularly down quite a bit of cookies, but by about the 3rd or 4th cookie, I could already tell I don't wanna do this. I don't wanna be getting 15, 25 cookies deep into this. I could already tell, but I was committed. And, 34 double stuffed Oreos plus the milk on top of it. 3 like large glasses of milk. And so the last hour was not fun sitting here uh trying to communicate and hold that down, and then probably for a good hour afterwards I was not feeling great to say the least, and then my body just kind of recovered and kicked in and I was perfectly fine.
So you didn't quite achieve the Cool Hand Luke level uh, eating achievement. You're
Which is
familiar with Paul Newman's 50 eggs in a minute.
50 eggs.
Cool
Ooh,
Hand Luke.
yeah.
Hard boiled eggs. Hard boiled eggs.
Well,
Uh, of course, a movie, I understand, but
this did force me in some ways to do something that I have never contemplated in my life, is to take the remainder of that package and just throw it away. Be done with it.
did you do that?
Yes.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
You
I'm
should have.
now going on a fast. I had already planned to go on a fast, so it had nothing to do with this. I was just waiting for this to clear out of the way before I started a fast.
It's too bad you don't have I'm surprised you don't have any neighbors that you could have given the cookies to and
Oh, well,
contributed to their health.
there are neighbors around. I could have tried them out and seen if they would have been willing to take those on. All right, folks. I do believe that our top story tonight, because I'm going to go to a list I compiled recently with awards, national awards, because this is a big deal. These awards don't come around very often when you're talking about the best of the best at a particular position. And of course, the Heisman Trophy gets the most attention. But when you look at the individual position awards that are among the most prestigious in all of sports, the Nagurski, the Butkus, the Lombardi, the Doak Walker, and each individual position has its. And as I was looking at ranking all time programs, that was one category which I investigated, each team's um, quantity, and I'll look that up for Iowa. But this is a rarity. So Jack Campbell being awarded the Butkus Award, um, for this past season. That is a huge deal again, and that's going to be on BTN here at 6 Central.
Yeah, and I believe they're showing as we speak. I believe they're showing one of his marquee performances from I believe this past year. He is. We've talked about Jack Campbell, and we even said a few weeks ago, Mark, as we kind of wallowed in the misery that is the Iowa offense. We said we need to dedicate a day to Phil Parker's defense, and so although we didn't talk about that prior to the show, I think we're going to spend a good chunk of this show talking about that defense, and specifically Jack Campbell, because as you said, what a prestigious honor for him. I know a lot of Iowa fans will be tuning in, getting primetime look at Jack and his very, very well deserved award. And let's not keep this in mind, Mark. Like, he's not projected to be a first round draft pick. And it's amazing to me. Now we'll see how he tests out at the combine, but I've said this so many times. I just don't know how you don't draft him in the top couple of rounds. If he slips to the third or fourth round, I'm no scout certainly, but we know about his intangibles. He's 6'5". He's a big dude. Maybe not the fastest guy in the world, but man, he just he's an Iowa linebacker, and I think Iowa. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Iowa is one of the probably the top 4 to 5 schools in the past 10 years at producing NFL caliber linebackers. So maybe that's not what Iowa's necessarily known for. That's not what their reputation is, but that's what they are. They've succeeded on a lot of different levels. You think about Anthony Hitchens, Christian Kirksey, Josie Jewell. There's Christian Welch has had a nice little career. Nick Neiman is in the league. So Ben Neiman, of course. So they've had a number of good storylines at that position. And so I just think teams would be foolish to pass up on him. And he's such a good kid. Remember, he lost his grandfather the night before the Music City Bowl, Mark, and he didn't even find out about it until after the game. And that obviously that pain is never going to heal. You lose a loved one, but you just love to see him have good moments. And he is a great representative of that program, regardless of what people have to say about the offense. I've been at the forefront of criticism with Brian Ferentz and that offense. You got to give Jack Campbell credit throughout the entire season, throughout his career. He was always a guy who stood up and said, look, we're one team. I love my guys on offense. Never even implied that the defense, that his unit was frustrated with Brian Ferentz's unit. And I'm not on that side of things. I've never competed at, collegiate sports at that level. But man, I would think that'd be hard just from a human standpoint. And so he's what you want in a leader and a person. He's got some great intangibles. He's a great football player. So I'm happy for him. It'll be great to see him honored today. And I just hope, I wish him the best. Whoever drafts him, it's kind of like the Linderbaum pick last year. I know Linderbaum tested out pretty well at the combine, kind of was criticized for having short arms. He's going to be, I think, an all-pro by the time all is said and done. I would guess the same thing for Jack Campbell. I think whoever drafts him will be pleased they drafted him in 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, just to touch upon something that you pointed out, certainly there are so many measurables and intangibles that go into the evaluation process of the NFL draft that are much more important than where the player went to school. And each player is, of course, evaluated based on their own credentials, but as some type of tie-breaking mechanism or down the list, I would think that there would be a lean toward a program like, in this case, Iowa linebackers, where they're that, okay, chances are this guy's going to turn out, because look at all these other examples from this same position unit under this same defensive coordinator. They must be prepared to play at this level. There must be something about their background experience and their training that have led them to a point where they can maybe somewhat outplay their talent level.
And the guys I just brought up, I think I'd have to go back and look at combine results. I'm not, unlike you, Mark, that can have a Oreo challenge where you're answering trivia all day. I can't do that with stats. And like, if you asked me what was Ben Neiman's, time at the combine, I couldn't tell you. I'm just not, that's not how my mind works. But I would venture to say that several of those guys that have been success stories in the league at that position, Josie Jewell being one, Ben Neiman being another, Christian Welch, like those guys. And Christian Welch, he's not carved out as necessarily a starting role in the league, but he's been He's been an NFL guy. He's getting paid, and he's been on the two deeps for Baltimore. I would venture to say none of those guys tested great at the combine. I'm guessing they're not the fastest of guys, and none of those guys had the size that Jack Campbell has. And I think that he can be used in a few. I don't know if he's more of a D end in the league. I don't know. I mean, could he be like a Brian Urlacher? I don't know that he has the athleticism of a Brian Urlacher, but man, again, I'm very hesitant to make a proclamation like that because he has exceeded expectation. Let's remember, he was not a highly touted kid out of Iowa. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how scouts look at Iowa guys in general. I'm sure that, as you said, that, if there's a situation where you're looking at two guys who have similar immeasurables and test similarly at the combine, you're probably going to give the nod to a guy who comes from a culture you're familiar with and a culture that's produced really good talent and success stories at the next level. I'm sure that'd be part of it. And let's not forget too, he's not had any off the field issues. And like, he's the perfect example of somebody that I'd be shocked. I would be shocked if we even saw, if we saw him get a DUI tomorrow, I'd be flabbergasted. Not saying the guys don't make mistakes, but he's just one of those guys that he just seems to be laser focused. He was never concerned with NIL. He probably could have jumped in the portal a year ago and went somewhere and got paid. And he didn't do that. He just had no interest in it. And I have no problem. I mean, I personally don't have an issue with guys like Justin Jacobs who want to leave and get paid immediately. That's their prerogative. It's their life. They have the freedom to do it. Who am I to be critical of that decision? But Jack Campbell is a guy who is going to be laser focused on his job. Not going to be a distraction. He's a no drama guy, no nonsense guy. Kind of similar to Josie Jewell in that respect. Josie Jewell's from a small town in Iowa too that had like no offers. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. And Iowa, and this is going to be a very interesting draft because Iowa, of course, you think about Sam Laporta, where is he going to end up? Lucas Van Ness leaves early, a guy who never actually started a game at Iowa that I'm aware of. Now, number of snaps is probably more important than who's actually starting on snap one. But those two guys, just Laporta and Van Ness, and then you add in Jack Campbell. Seth Benson, could he get a late flyer? Riley Moss, where will he go? He looked pretty good here at the Senior Bowl just a few weeks ago. They've lost some. John Wagner, he's a guy who's a big guy. I don't know that he met expectations as an Iowa D end, but he had a long career here. He was a starting guy. Maybe he'll test really well at the combine. I mean, again, we just don't know. This could be a very productive year in the NFL draft for Iowa. So it will be fascinating to see. And the bottom line is, as we know, almost all those guys, I think all of them, am I right? Besides Laporta, all those guys are guys who play on defense. So if anything, the draft and the exposure that Iowa will get this evening by means of this award for Jack Campbell will help defensive recruiting.
And we alluded to this earlier. This is how special this award is. So in the history of Iowa football, there have only been, and when I say only, that doesn't mean that Iowa is lagging behind other schools. This is pretty standard for most football programs, is that Iowa only has 12 previous national position awards. So this is just the 13th in the history of the program where there has been a position where Iowa was judged to have the player that was the very best at that particular position. And again, Lombardi, Nagurski, all the various Biletnikoff. Now that would be a story if we can one day report and cover an Iowa Biletnikoff Award winner. That would be
would it be something? What do you think the odds in Vegas would be on that? Like, what would be the odds in Vegas that Iowa has?
I think they would take that off the board. It wouldn't exist. I also think it would be intriguing. I don't know that either one of us would have the time to truly prepare for this type of show, to have this discussion, but I've mentioned this in the past. Iowa, as of last NFL season, had the sixth most, let that sink in, everyone, the sixth most NFL players on NFL rosters. Now, generally, you can go right across the board, Alabama, Ohio State, and it falls right in line. Yeah. Now, there are aberrations on both ends of the scale, of course, but Iowa's the first one to pop up as, okay, this is not the sixth best football program in the country. It's more like the 20th. And they have produced the sixth most NFL players currently. So There's a lot that should be given credit to Kirk and the rest of the staff. But then there's also a question as to producing the sixth most NFL players.
Yeah. How do you digest that, Mark? I mean, how
Yeah,
do you digest that?
because on one hand, we'll stay in the positive side here for a second, preparing guys that are then ready to be drafted and make an NFL roster that obviously weren't, for the most part, not every single player. Xavier Wampa is going to be the next best example, 5-star, that maybe weren't necessarily considered that type of talent coming out of high school. So they were developed um, as individual players to be able to ascend to the next level. However, if you've got and I know just because you get the sixth most NFL players, that doesn't mean that you've got the sixth best talent. That's just taking a fairly small group of players over the course of all those rosters year after year after year. You got to be thinking that that comprises about roughly the last 10 Iowa rosters. So it is a fairly small sample size to an extent, but it is representative of the best talent and the best players at Iowa moving on to the next level. That why can't those same players produce a better result on the field? Not that the result, meaning the win loss um, from year to year, has been poor for Iowa. It's been good. It's not been sixth best in the country good.
Well, and what I would add to that too is if you look at a number like that for a program like Iowa, one might look at that and assume, all right, you just have individuals in every unit that are really good, but they just can't mesh it all together. And that's true to an extent. But I think the more reasonable conclusion we can draw from those numbers as it relates to Iowa is that you've got one unit, one defensive unit as a whole that's just producing a lot of NFL talent everywhere, right? I don't know percentage wise of the total number of guys who are in the NFL on an active roster from Iowa. What percent of those guys play defense? My guess is it's probably at least 75% would be my guess. So it's not necessarily just good individuals. You've just got some really good units and then some units that have been really bad, like wide receiver. Wide receiver has been pretty bad as it relates to production and certainly NFL production. Running back has been, from a NFL development standpoint, Mark, and from a production standpoint, running back's been bad. Now I know Tyler Goodson's coming off a 1,000-yard rushing year. They didn't rush the ball very well, and he's not really carved himself a spot in the league. He'll get another chance, I'm sure, in a camp here, assuming he's still with the Packers. Perhaps I'm wrong on that. But and I think the future is better there with the young guys they have. But we've been saying that. We've said that before. So I think it's just kind of a result of what we see with the numbers, that the offense in large part struggles. Now, I think the one unit you could look at and say, boy, not a strong unit, but strong individual examples would be the offensive line, right? I mean, Tyler Linderbaum is a perfect example. He played here when the offensive line was pretty bad, and he was the best center in the country by the time he graduated. Very strange. That's odd, but you need 5 guys, right? You need 5 healthy guys across the line to have a really good unit. And so and tight end is always strong, right? I mean, when's the last time Iowa hasn't had a strong tight end room? But it's there is a stark differential, as we've talked about, not just with production at this level, but with the development of the league. So it's an amazing thing, and Kirk deserves to be praised. Phil Parker deserves to be praised. Guys like Seth Wallace, LeVar Woods. But at the same time, it's a frustrating thing because you're thinking, man, if we did any development at wide receiver, if we did any development at running back, if we were developing our quarterbacks to any extent, man, what would those numbers look like? Right? I mean, they're already nipping at the heels of those elite programs and getting no production from those skill position spots. So it is a fascinating conversation.
If you want to divide each side of the ball into 5 units, so quarterback, running back, offensive line, wide receiver, tight end, and then on the defensive side, split the line between ends and tackles, linebackers, corners, and safeties. Off the top of my head, I don't think there's a unit, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, on the defensive side where there's this crazy disparity. Like there's just nothing there. Maybe D tackle, I don't know. But anyway, whereas you just pointed out on the offensive side, it's all weighted in tight ends and offensive linemen. And then the other one positions are void.
Let me just respond real quickly to the defensive tackle
Yep.
question. Mike Daniels,
Yeah. Sure.
Carl Davis,
Yep.
Jaleel Johnson. I don't know if Cedric Lattimore is on an active roster, but
Davian Nixon.
Davion Nixon. Let's not forget about Davion Nixon. I think they got a guy coming in this year in Ontario Thompson from Iowa Western who's got a chance to be really good. Whereas number 54 was compared to Davion coming out of college. Played it. I mean, Davion played at Iowa Western as well, so they have a chance with a couple. Really, obviously, Aaron Graves is going to be another guy that's they just. You're right. They're every position on defense. And I questioned Riley Moss. I've questioned him a number of times on this show, Mark, and I hope I eat crow on Riley. It sounds like he impressed a lot of people at the Senior Bowl, and I'll be intrigued. He made a comment here. Somebody told me, I didn't hear this from his mouth, but a friend of mine said that I guess Riley said he wants to run in the 4.3, 4.4 range at the combine, which is pretty darn good, right? If you can get down there. Now, he may not, right? Guys always say, well, I'm a 4.5, and then they go to the combine and run a 4.65. So we'll see what happens. But if he does test down there, boy, he may get drafted in, inside the third round. That's possible. I never really thought he was going to be a top 3 round draft pick. I thought he'd maybe get a late flyer last year and maybe this year a 5th or 6th round pick. But it'll be interesting. I wish him the best. He's another guy who wasn't recruited heavily out of high school, went very much under the radar. Was a really good track star, which is always a good sign. Here's something that got brought up, Mark, and I don't mean to go on a tangent. I know some people like when I go on tangents, but I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day about this subject and about 40 times, right? And about 100-meter times. And if you go back and research Iowa 40 times, so to say we're talking about the combine or we're talking about even just, let's talk about high school results, right? And track results. There is such a disparity with the best receivers and their 40 times and their 100-meter times versus Iowa corners and their 40 times, their 100-meter times. Like Iowa, and I'm going to have to pull some results together, and because it is fascinating. We were talking about this over lunch the other day at Olive Garden, by the way. And we were just talking about how, like Cooper DeJean, I don't remember his times, but man, that dude is fast. You look up Iowa receiver, and I'm not ripping anybody on the Iowa receiver. I hope all of them explode on the scene next year. And I'm not going to name anybody specifically, but I couldn't find a single receiver that it's on this roster for next year that in high school ran a really impressive 100-meter time.
Where are you pulling those numbers from? Like their individual 247 page?
No, most of them, they have a track page somewhere. And there are some guys I don't even think Seth Anderson ran track in high school, which I know some coaches would say that's a big red flag. Why isn't he running track? Now, he was a wrestler, which is really strange for a receiver to be a wrestler. But the guys that I found, we were just, again, talking over lunch. I wasn't seeing anybody that blew me away with their track times. That is odd, but it also makes sense, right? Iowa has produced more NFL talent on defense than offense. It's not even close. And so when is that going to change? Like the argument that Iowa can't attract good athletes is false because they do it on defense. Yes, they develop these guys, but they are getting good. Like Cooper DeJean is a really good athlete. He is. Riley Moss, especially if he runs down in the 4.3s, 4.4s, he's a really good athlete. So I don't know. That's an interesting project. We've got some time in the next few months. Maybe I'll do a project on that.
Yeah, I would love to hear the results. And you know what the narrative is. You know what the assumption is from college football fans. And I'm even talking about knowledgeable, not just fans, media, that if they're watching Iowa and they see that somebody is a projected pro, there's an assumption that they're really good at what they do. Their techniques spot on. They've done all the right things. They're really good as a technician, but they're not a freakish athlete. It's just this assumption
I
that's
know.
wrong oftentimes.
It is to an extent. George Kittle's a good example. I mean, he's a pretty unique athlete. I don't remember how he tested out the combine. He was not a real high draft pick. He's a 4th round pick, but I mean, people look at George Kittle and they think hey, he got this WWE persona. Some of that wasn't sported at Iowa. Was that Iowa kind of preventing that, or was that just George Kittle blooming later? Tight end's a whole new discussion. Like, we could talk long and hard about how Iowa produces all these tight ends, but Mark, you could argue that Iowa really underutilizes their tight ends. And I say that, I understand Sam Laporta is coming off a record year. But George Kittle, you go back and look at his college production. It was just meh. It's just okay. And he did deal with injuries. That should be noted. Noah Fant, Mark, by the time his career ended, he wasn't even started. He wasn't even on the field very much. And that next spring, he was a 1st-round draft pick. I don't know. Those are interesting conversations to be had, and this is the time of year to have those conversations. Tight end is I know I'm going all over the place. Tight end is a very fascinating conversation with Iowa because they're producing NFL guys, and they get a lot of production out of their tight ends. But with what we're seeing at the NFL level, you could argue that some of those guys have actually been underutilized in the Iowa system.
I'm just picturing you and what the scene looks like with you at Olive Garden in the state of Iowa. That it's probably it's just like you just every turn around and you had to sign autograph here, autograph there.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
just
exactly
getting mobbed.
It's exactly that way, Mark.
That's what I figured.
So I try not to venture out of the house and except on Wednesdays because
you're probably
can't handle the anxiety.
Yeah. Cole is asking, I'm really interested in what Corey thinks about you, that would be me, having Matt Rule ranked higher than Kirk Ferentz on your coaches' rankings. So we delivered our coaches' rankings over on the main channel, 3-part series, 69 all the way up to number 1. Those are only Power 5 rankings. And off the top of my head, Kirk's at 32, Matt Rule's at just above that somewhere. I don't remember exactly where.
I mean, by the way, I didn't watch all of your coaching rankings, but I did watch the rankings that you where you included Kirk Ferentz. So my thought on that is very simple. You're looking at what have you done for me lately?
Yes.
Right. That's one part of it. And then I think the other part of it is you look at Matt Rule and you think, well, he hasn't, he failed at Carolina. Well, we're not talking about success as an NFL coach. He's been really successful everywhere he's been as a college football head coach. Now, I think part of that, we should acknowledge the fact he was really good at Temple, but Temple's not the Big Ten. He was really good at Baylor, but he didn't have a long tenure there. Not a real long tenure. Certainly nothing like Kirk Ferentz's tenure. But what he has proven, and I think what he's proven so far in the recruiting trail, is that he's in a position to elevate Nebraska to a status they haven't seen in the last 10 years. And perhaps further back than that. So I don't have a problem with the rankings. I understand where you're coming from. Kirk is, as you said in your breakdown, Kirk is the epitome of stability and consistency, and he deserves to be credited for that. I think Iowa is they are a top 25 program, maybe fringe, Mark. I think they're a top 20 to 25 program year in and year out. So you could argue maybe you have him a little bit low, but at the same time, is exactly what you said. They're stable program, respected, solid run, great start. Offense is horrible. So, I mean, that's going to eat. I mean, 32, when you look at 131 FBS teams, that's a pretty good ranking. You're not looking, Mark, you're not ranking these programs based on like who would win against one another, because some of these programs are playing in different conferences. You're just looking at the best coaches. Now, my guess is the majority of your great coaches in the top 32 are from the Power 5, maybe all of them. And there's a reason for that, because great coaches end up coaching at the highest level. But you're not evaluating program here. You're evaluating each head coach.
So the first thing I would say is just similar to ranking the actual teams during the season. I think once you get to 12, 15 in that range. You've got a like 15 to 40 that's close. Like there's not a whole lot of space there. And I would never defend this as being a perfect system, a perfect ranking. They can all be debated. If somebody had Kirk 10 spots higher, I would not, I may challenge it, but I wouldn't disrespect it or think it was insane. If somebody had him 10 spots lower, that I would challenge that. So I probably have him, I definitely have him on the low end of the scale of where I would place him, where I
You're
would
also
think about placing him.
you are also not prioritizing longevity, and you're not
No.
prioritizing
Yeah, he would
extent of resume.
skyrocket. His career would skyrocket him if I was judging a career.
He would be top 10 probably
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you're judging a career.
yeah, he blows by everybody that we see on the screen.
These are, you know what these are, Mark? These are like power rankings.
Yeah,
What you're doing are essentially power rankings, how you're assessing a coach right now. Is that fair?
yes,
You're not looking at resume.
yes,
This is not a top 25 that actually makes sense. This is like a power rankings.
absolutely.
So I will say this. You're the voice of college football, not me. Mario Cristobal, well, you acknowledge your horrible first season,
Yes.
left Oregon in good shape, but I mean, what did he ever really accomplish at Oregon?
Do you want me to start?
Sure, go ahead.
He won 2 conference championships.
Okay. Yeah, and
He
again,
won a Rose he won a Rose Bowl, and he
yes.
finished ranked in the top 6 in the country that year.
Yeah. So that's a 1 year. You're looking at one of those
He
two
won
conference
2 Pac-12
championships.
Can you imagine Kirk
And then
winning 2 Big 10 championships?
well, he's won 2 Big 10 championships. That's what I'm
Well,
saying.
a
You're not
million years
looking.
ago.
I know. So I'm acknowledging it. I'm simply
Yeah,
acknowledging if
yeah.
you were looking at Kirk Ferentz's resume, it's every bit as good and better than a guy like Mario
Oh,
Cristobal.
sure. It's better.
Now
Yeah.
he's never won a Rose Bowl, but he's won an Orange Bowl, right? Which, I mean, what's the difference? I guess there is a
Well,
difference
no,
per
no, no,
sense
no.
of what.
Okay, so there even though it's based on right this second, there has to be some okay, we could have whoever you think is the best like if Nick Saban went 3-9 next season, I wouldn't or let's say he goes 6-6 next season, he would not plummet a million spots. It wouldn't
Well,
be, well, this is a 6-6 head coach.
yeah,
Like there is some there has to be some credit given and evaluation of recency, not
I
just
agree, but
last season.
well, I'm not even talking. But see that you're going back to resume, but we're talking. This is a largely subjective list,
Oh,
right?
of course it is. Yeah.
I mean, you know, um, I mean, you are, but you do bring up Brett Bielema, great at Wisconsin. He was at Wisconsin how many years ago? I mean, you
Well,
know,
you got to understand this is more notes for me just to talk, just to spur things in my head. I'm not kind of proving the point, but
well, I understand, but that's a note here in your rankings, so that's
yes.
obviously part of
Yep.
your talking points, right?
Mhm.
And he hasn't been at Wisconsin in how many years? 10, 15, 10, 10, 12 years ago?
Yeah.
He left in 2011, is that right?
Yes.
So, I mean, yeah, 12 years
11.
ago.
Yeah.
I'm not
Well,
ripping you for your rankings here, Mark. Like I said at the beginning, I don't have any issue with your rankings, but as you said, I think you could move Kirk upwards. I don't think you're moving him much further down. I don't even who do you have below Kirk? Who do you have below in the 33 to 40
yeah.
positions?
Again, I stated a few minutes ago that this is he's on the low end of where I would rank him.
Yeah, I mean, Pat Fitzgerald. See, this is a good example of your objectivity, though, because you got Pat Fitzgerald at 35 in the country, and again, if you're looking at resume, like what he's accomplishments at Northwestern, he's accomplished a lot at Northwestern, given the fact that it's Northwestern. But right now, his power ranking is trending downward. I mean,
Yeah, last year I had him fringe top 10.
yeah. And so, but you're to be clear, you're not basing this on one season. It's not like, well, based on what you did last season, where do I rank you? But it's a reflection of everything too. And I can't speak for you. You don't have anything in your notes here about Kirk Ferentz as it relates to how he manages the program, how he is managing the program. But I mean, if I was making these rankings, which I won't do because I'm certainly no voice nationally, I would evaluate how a guy is recruiting right now. I would evaluate how he's doing
Mhm.
in the portal right now because
Yeah.
that's a big part of being head coach.
Yes.
I would evaluate how he, it's harder to evaluate him as it relates to NIL, but I think that has to be somewhat involved. That has a direct correlation with recruiting and with the transfer portal. And I know that coaches aren't supposed to have a direct role, but you and I both know that coaches do have a role in NIL, name, image, and likeness, and using it to their advantage. And the other thing is, how are they operating the program as it relates to staff changes? And you have been very critical of Kirk Ferentz doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on his staff here in recent weeks. I have too. That, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, that for me would be a significant bump down, because that tells me, as much as I have have respect for Kirk Ferentz and I admire what he's done, and I think he's a top 30 to 35 coach at the minimum, he is not going to be probably top 15 to 20 for me, because I don't believe right now he's making the best decisions for this program as it relates to the staff. And that's a big part of his job as the head coach. It's not just about, it's not just about team success, although it is in the end. And he would argue that it's all about wins versus losses. We're projecting forward. We're talking about which coach you have confidence in, which coach you believe. I think if you put all these coaches in similar positions, which ones would have the most success? And there are a couple of examples there of Kirk Ferentz maybe not doing what's best for the program. And I think that, for me, would bump him down.
Bingo. So what you just stated a second ago about, I almost said something close to that in the video, that I would rank him 15 to 20 spots higher, even if they had the exact same win-loss record over the last 5 years. If he would have addressed the issues on offense, like if they would have hired an offensive coordinator, let's say in 2017, which I believe is Brian's first year, and they had churned out the same lack of productivity, and then at a reasonable time, what would be the barometer that you see across the country, maybe the third season, maybe the fourth season, okay, enough. You haven't proven that you can do the job, you're gone. And then he had, found somebody else. Now I would question if we were on a third hire maybe coming up at offensive coordinator, his ability to hire the right offensive coordinator, but at least he would have been going out there trying to upgrade the offense.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the arguments against Nick Saban, I used to be on the other side of this because I've been frustrated with Nick Saban's dominance and his dynasty at Alabama for about as long as I've been alive, or at least been following college football, Mark. The bottom line is, recruiting is part of the job. Making decisions about your staff is part of the job. How you distribute scholarships, that's part of your job. This is, when you're talking about college coaching, there's a lot of reasons why the greatest personalities in coaching don't want to be head coaches in college, because there's a lot involved and you have to evaluate these guys based on everything. I think it's probably easier to evaluate a pro coach, whether we're talking about the NBA, NFL, whatever. So, if you're just looking at wins and losses, he's absolutely a top 20 to 25 head coach. He would argue he's much higher because he put Iowa in the group with Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, when he talked about teams that had the most sustainability since 15 with 8 or more wins,
8 or more
minus
wins.
the COVID year. He would put, that's putting Iowa in the top 5 to 6, right? Putting Kirk in the top 5 to 6. But see, that's not my sliding scale. That's not how I would evaluate it either. So I don't know. It's a good conversation to have. And you want to know my biggest fear with Iowa football right now, Mark? And it's got nothing. It does have something to do with Brian. But as much as we've ranted and raved about Brian Ferentz and the offense over recent weeks, my biggest fear with Iowa, and we've talked about this to an extent, is that what we have discussed comes true. Iowa makes a decision on a staff change a year late. You have USC and UCLA joining the conference. You have the divisions going bye-bye. You have NIL only gaining traction. I don't know how much further, what's going to end up happening with NIL and what rule changes may come down the line, down the pipeline, but it's not going away, right? You can't put toothpaste back in the bottle. And what I fear will happen is that Kirk walks away, whether it be after this year or after 2024. And Iowa is in a very, very precarious position. And it's almost like trying to row a boat upstream. You just get stuck so far down, and it's just an uphill battle. And the further you get back, the harder it is to gain that ground back. And that's what I worry about. And that's why a lot of Wisconsin fans, they are like the contrast of Iowa. For years, people grouped Iowa and Wisconsin as parallel programs. And now they have taken very opposite approaches. And we'll see which one works out, Mark. But I think the fear from Iowa fans, my fear is that they made the proactive decision and they said, we like the stability that Paul Chryst has brought here, albeit not to the level or the length of time that Kirk Ferentz has achieved it at Iowa, but certainly from a win-loss perspective, year in and year out, Paul Chryst was achieving what Kirk Ferentz has been achieving at Iowa. They said, we're not satisfied with that. We don't want to become complacent. We understand what's coming in the next couple of years. We need to prepare. Iowa's not really preparing for that. Not that I can see from the outside looking in. I don't know what preparation Iowa has made as it really, besides getting that NIL collective formed, which credit to Kirk to an extent. I brought that up earlier. Coaches deserve some credit with how their NIL collectives operate or don't operate. But Brad Heinrichs and that crew, they've done a tremendous job. Besides that, and that was really not something that Kirk wanted to do. It was one of those things he had to do. I do worry that Iowa's not preparing for that future and not taking a proactive approach to things. And that does start with the staff, and it comes down to attitude with recruiting. It comes down to schematics and your stylistic approach. All those things come into play.
There have been at least 5 times during the show in which at the conclusion of your statement, I was about to make a point, and then you took it down the same path that I was about to. So you just brought up a school that I was going to ask you, okay, before you brought up that school, I was going to say, what program would you most closely align to Iowa?
Right now?
Yes. Or in the last 10 or 15, 20 years even.
I mean, Wisconsin.
Right? Bam. There you go. I'm right there with you. And I think that's anybody that follows college football closely for a number of reasons, playing in the same division, same conference, being very like programs in terms of their approach, their style. In the past, again, Wisconsin's taken a break. They have been more aggressive, more assertive, pointing toward the future. But Hair Trigger makes the comment here, Kirk's only had 3 seasons at Iowa that were under 500. That's pretty impressive. I agree. For the level of program, really. However, during that same period of time, how many losing seasons has Wisconsin had? I'll tell you, none.
Yeah. And they, so what are they doing, Mark? Are they saying we don't care about stability by making this move? Is this a huge risk move for Wisconsin? I mean, is it? I'm just curious. Is what Wisconsin's doing with what they did, getting Luke Fickell to come and changing their approach, is that a big risk? Are they taking a huge risk?
No.
Why?
Because they just are they taking a risk? Yeah, anytime you do something different than the way you've done it successfully in the past, that's a risk. But for me, the head coaching hire was not a risk. They made the best head coaching move of the offseason. Now, does he have a 20-year track record? No. But he's the best coach on the market. They got him. If they have made a tactical error in their offensive approach, I think that can be corrected fairly easily.
But they fired Paul Chryst before Luke Fickell was lined up, right? We believe that.
Oh yeah.
We don't believe that those conversations were occurring to where they knew, hey, we got Luke Fickell.
Unless something comes out that's similar to what happened with USC and Lincoln Riley, where we found out later that USC was talking to Lincoln Riley mid-season.
I have a hard time. I mean, the thing about it is, what would that say about Jim Leonard? I mean the perception, if that's the case, then Wisconsin hid that really well, because I think a lot of people expected Jim Leonard to take over. So the reason I bring that, what's that? Say it.
It's probably not the case. I'm just telling you that we do have an example of that going on.
So my point is, Mark, they didn't have Luke Fickell lined up, and maybe they thought Jim Leonard was a safe hire as well, and they found out, hey, we can go get Luke Fickell. That's even safer with a higher ceiling than what we believe Jim can do for us. It's possible. Maybe that's what happened. They had a lot of confidence in Jim Leonard, and they knew he was a fallback. And Iowa doesn't have that. That's fine. We can argue that Iowa doesn't have that. I'm not talking. I'm not. And by the way, I'm not advocating for Kirk to be fired. Don't believe me. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not saying Iowa needs to take the exact approach that Wisconsin did, but Wisconsin parted ways with Paul Chryst, we assume, prior to conversations with Luke Fickell. So that is a big swing. That's a big risk. What they did, from a perspective of, they didn't have a guy lined up. It's not like they had a guy that they knew was. I mean, Luke Fickell is as safe of a hire as you can have. But I don't think maybe they believed in Jim Leonard to that extent. But I'm just saying they didn't know who was going to be the next head coach when they made that fire, when they parted ways with Paul.
No, I think those are two different things. I think that they may have fired Paul. I think it's likely, highly likely, 90% likely or more, that they fired Paul Chryst and inserted Jim Leonard, not knowing who their next coach was going to be. But at the point that they decided Jim Leonard's not going to be the next head coach, I believe it's fairly likely that at that point they did know it was going to be Luke Fickell.
Well, I mean,
So
sure.
those can be two different things.
Well, what's that got to do with anything?
Well, them taking the risk to fire Paul Chryst, yes, that is a risk.
Yes.
But they are Wisconsin. They can get a capable coach, and I believe that they were truly auditioning Jim Leonard to see how he handled the last 7 or 8 games of the season, whatever the number was, something in that range. And then they either determined he didn't meet our standard, or under other conditions, we would have kept him. However, we think we can get Luke Fickell, or we have talked to Luke Fickell and we've got him.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. Here's what I'll say. You just made a comment, and I know you're probably going to agree with my stance on this, but you made a comment a second ago. Well, they're Wisconsin. They knew they could attract somebody. So there's the difference. So Wisconsin said, we get rid of Paul Chryst. We are confident in who we are. We are comfortable with who we are. We're confident in who we are as a program, as a university. And that's something Iowa can't say. I mean, I just know a lot. Maybe some on the inside feel that way, but I hear from people on the outside all the time who say we have to just appreciate what we have, because go back and remember the Lauterbur days. And, I'm serious. I mean, you hear this, Mark. This is out there. And that's, it goes back to the conversations about, well, we could always be Nebraska. My point is, I think there's a lot of people inside and outside the Iowa program that believe without Kirk and without Hayden, this program is, and to an extent, they're right. Like where the program was when both of those guys took over, both those guys elevated things. But I think there's a lot of people who believe it's going to be almost impossible to do better than either of those guys. That's the mindset. But what you just said, if that's accurate or reflecting how Wisconsin feels or how they felt in making that move with Paul Chryst, is they said, we're comfortable. We know we can go get somebody. We're comfortable making a change. And we're not afraid of rocking the boat, because we are stable. We are a commodity, a valuable commodity to college football. And I don't think there's enough people around the Iowa program that feel like Iowa's real valuable to the college football world. Because if there was, I mean, there might be a little bit. I'm not saying, again, I'm not advocating for Kirk to be fired, but if there was, one would think Kirk would not be allowed to do what he's doing as it relates to Brian. There would be, I think Iowa would be in a position to where they can leverage Kirk, as I said months and months ago before the season ever ended, leverage Kirk and saying, no, Kirk, you're going to do, we love you. We respect you. We've given you a lot of power here, but you've gone too far with this. We want you to be our head coach, but you need to do this. As either Gary Barta or the president or whoever, right? Whoever is supposed to be overseeing Kirk Ferentz could use that leverage. You get where I'm coming with this, Mark?
I'm right there with you. Yep.
But I don't think that's the mindset. I think the mindset is we're fearful of where we could go.
Yeah.
And we're fearful of what happens after Kirk. Wisconsin was not fearful of what would happen after Christ. And part of that is because Iowa's had 2 coaches in 43 years. Wisconsin had a bunch of coaches over the course of many years. And that's part of it, right? They got used to winning under different personalities. Iowa has not had that, for better or worse.
Yeah, I'm going to make a statement that people are going to disagree with to a certain extent, but I want to make it clear that I'm not making a definitive statement like I'm saying this is true for sure. I'm just saying there's an argument that can be made, and it's a pretty easy one to make, that Paul Chryst had a better tenure at Wisconsin than Kirk has had at Iowa.
I think winning percentage he did.
Oh, correct? He's got a much better winning percentage.
And he had how many division titles?
2014, 16, 19, 3 division titles in 7 years.
Yeah, and Kirk has had 2 in 11?
And more regularly, higher rankings, better bowl record, just in a shorter period of time. So I'm not saying that he should be given as much credit, because it's difficult to sustain that for a longer period of time. And he was certainly given a much better program. So I'm just saying that that argument can be made that Paul Chryst had a better tenure than Kirk has at Iowa, and he was let go.
And maybe, Mark, maybe Wisconsin is just a better program than Iowa, regardless of coach. Maybe that's the case, and maybe the fears from Iowa people, at least the fans, and I think it's reflected in how the administration has operated. Perhaps Wisconsin's just in a better. It's just a better program.
Should it be? Though?
No, I don't know why it is. I don't know why it is.
Are there that many more people that live in Wisconsin? Do they have that much better high school football players? None of that.
I think they probably have better high school football, but Iowa high school football has been better in recent years. And let's not forget, Wisconsin also has to compete with, well, maybe they don't compete, but I think to an extent they do. They got a pro football team right there in Green Bay. Mm-hmm. That's a factor. And they don't have a Wisconsin State, right? They don't have another big-time football program that they have to compete with, unlike Iowa and Iowa State. But they don't have Iowa does not have a pro sports team, and that's advantage Iowa. And Don Patterson has talked about that. And he used that as leverage in recruiting. Back when he was recruiting back in his home state of Texas, he'd tell kids, "Hey, these are the Dallas Cowboys of Iowa," because Dallas is always America's team. The Hawkeyes are Iowa's team. It's the Hawkeye State. So I don't buy into the notion that Iowa is just this mediocre program that's been elevated because of 2 people. And I have great respect for both of those people, Hayden Fry and Kirk Ferentz. And by the way, I don't think Hayden Fry I don't believe Hayden Fry would have approved of some of what Kirk's doing right now. I think Kirk has a lot of respect for Hayden Fry. But if Hayden were around now, I don't know how he would respond. I didn't know Hayden personally. But Hayden, for the most part, his reputation at Iowa in the 20-some years he was here, he did what was best for the program. Kirk has done that for most of his tenure, but I'd say over the last few seasons, you could question that. And the moment a head coach stops doing what's best for the football program, he deserves to be criticized in my mind. I don't buy into the notion that Iowa is some subpar, mediocre program that is just living off the coattails of 2 men. I believe life after Kirk Ferentz, as it relates to Iowa football, will go on. However, I do fear him leaving at a very inopportune time. And the potential for having those fears realized as Iowa fans, having the fears that Iowa is just a mediocre program, having those fears realized if Kirk leaves at the wrong time or waits too long to make the right changes. That's where I'm coming from with all this.
Yeah, I think all of that is valid. And in the meantime, I was curious. There's the population of the 2 states. So how much of a factor is that? I think it is a factor. Most of the major programs in the country play in fairly populous states. But again, they have to share attention with the Green Bay Packers, and not even share it, be overshadowed by it.
You are the voice of college football. You want to talk about Wisconsin football in the 80s and 90s? I mean,
Well, in the 80s up until 1993, that was the breakthrough.
so but I mean, talk about it because everybody wants to talk about Lauterbur, and let's realize that a lot of programs that are really strong now had really dark pasts and had eras where they were bad football programs. Wisconsin at one time was a bad football program. So was Iowa. That happens. That doesn't mean we're destined to return there. I think that's the attitude difference. Wisconsin's not afraid of returning to that era, or they wouldn't have made the change that they did. I agree with 750 donuts of doom in our chat. I agree. So anyways, what a great username, by the way, Mark. And is that a dog in his picture?
Yes, I believe. What is that? Yes, it is.
Is it okay?
It's
I
a
agree.
great
Yeah.
beard. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, how about that for a rant? I didn't think we'd go on a rant, but that went in a decent direction. I thought it's been a fun hour. This hour flew by faster than I anticipated. And this time of year, Mark, a normal Iowa show will probably, where we're just talking about, we don't come on here and talk about every sport. We talk about football.
That's
So
it.
there's
Football.
reasons to believe this show during the off season could get dry and could get old. Not here. We got fresh
Not at
stuff
all.
every week.
That I have had co-hosts on other channels, not here, make the mistake of trying to bring on other sports, and I suddenly, the hand goes up very quickly. Now, not that we won't have a quick exchange about basketball. I will let you know that the other night I was flipping around, surfing around at 10 o'clock at night, whatever it was, and I came across the Iowa, I've got Wisconsin on the brain, the Iowa Northwestern post game on the Big Ten Network, and I actually stopped for 30 seconds and listened to what's his name? What's the head coach of Iowa's?
McCaffrey.
I listened to his basically him giving credit to Northwestern because it was a blowout and they just weren't up to it that night. I listened for about 30 seconds and then I moved on.
Well, Fran McCaffrey got tossed in that game.
Oh, I did see that on the graphic.
He got ejected. Other thing is, I'm disappointed that you were watching that post game and not my post game. But anyways, we can go on.
Not intentionally. I would, of course, prioritize your post game each and every time. Of course.
My feelings are only hurt a lot, Mark, so no worries.
Of course they are. I know before we walk out the door, unless you need to go, that I believe you had a angle on this whole Trayshawn Holden situation. So, of course, former Alabama receiver had Iowa under consideration, chooses Oregon. There was a really nasty situation that I don't want to call the details to because I don't know them off the top of my head because it's been 4 or 5 days since I glanced at it. But I know that at one point you tweeted something out as kind of justification for the possibly Iowa not claiming him, but then there's some other evidence or that has come out since, correct?
The charges have been dismissed against Trayshawn Holden.
Yes.
So he was arrested. He of course was he joined the Ducks program, was arrested here in recent weeks, charged with a felony and a couple other counts as well. I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe I don't want to say gun related charges for sure, but definitely weapon related charges. And I simply made the comment here's the deal. Let me establish this. We all agree innocent until proven guilty, and charges are merely accusations, right? We understand that, and that's good. But I think we can also acknowledge that you probably, if you have a choice in a situation like Iowa and other programs around the country in recruiting a guy like Trayshawn Holden, I'm not saying they knew those charges were coming, but if you have reason to believe they could be coming, you might just decide, we don't want to take that risk. So what I did when Trayshawn was arrested, and that story became public, is I stated on Twitter, I said, this is a credit to Kirk Ferentz. In hindsight, this is a check mark. And that's just me giving credit where credit is due, in my opinion, because what the reports out there were that Iowa pulled out of the sweepstakes for former Bama receiver Trayshawn Holden because of, quote, baggage. That's what I heard from a couple different people. All right. And he got arrested. It's like, wow, okay, that's validation. We made a good decision. Don't know what Oregon was doing, but we made a good decision. Maybe Nick Saban kind of took Kirk aside as an old friend and said, hey, you might want to know this. And they didn't do that with Oregon. I don't know. But that is a good look for Iowa that they, because at the time when we heard, well, they passed up on him due to baggage, I remember even speculating on here, well, that could just be the narrative that Iowa was pushing because they knew they weren't going to get him, right? That could be the narrative they pushed. Certainly doesn't appear to be the case. So give Kirk credit for that, for recognizing it. I will acknowledge this. Trayshawn Holden's, those charges have since been dismissed. I've not taken the time to go look at the criminal complaint. I'm really not that interested. If he was a Hawkeye, I'd probably do that. But I've not looked up the criminal complaint, so I don't know the details of the case per se. But I will say the charges were dismissed. As you know, Mark, that doesn't always mean that he is innocent of all accusations. That's not what that means. We don't know what happened. But regardless, because I had somebody attack me on Twitter, well, you should have the facts first before me. I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm simply saying regardless if I don't even know if the alleged crime took place after or before he got to Eugene, but regardless, assuming he gets to Iowa and the same thing happens and he gets arrested and the charges are later dismissed, that's probably not the type of publicity that you want for your program. And it's unfortunate, like if by happenstance those accusations against Trayshawn Holden are completely made up, like it never happened, nothing ever happened, and he's guilty of nothing, it's very unfortunate for him, and I wish him all the best. I hope he gets an opportunity somewhere else. And whoever is accusing him of those things, if they're not telling the truth, they ought to be held accountable, in my opinion. But at the same time, I can also acknowledge, and I think you'd probably agree with this, Mark, you still probably would look at the situation and say, hey, I'm glad we didn't roll the dice on that one, because it's just, regardless of what actually happened.
Oh, yeah.
We'll go somewhere else and avoid any of that drama, any of that distraction. Does that make sense where I'm coming from on this?
Oh, it absolutely does. I think there can be a difference between somebody being guilty of something. And again, this doesn't mean that this just means, yes, the charges were dismissed. But even if he's not guilty, there is still a judgment there. There's still lack of judgment that can be perceived in somebody's life as being
Perhaps.
around those kind of situations, being somebody who shows up and attracts those situations, runs to those kind of situations and scenarios that are not good.
That's that's a fair extrapolation. That's a fair guess. And again, I wish him all the best. Let's also note it's noteworthy that when he was arrested, he was almost immediately dismissed by the Oregon program.
Yes.
So maybe that's a quick fire decision on the part of the Ducks. You talk to Duck media people. Maybe you can give me some insight if you've had the conversations. But perhaps that was a way too quick of a decision, and that's a decision that they regret and they have to live with. But perhaps they know something that we don't. That's also possible. So it's unfortunate for a young guy who is very athletic, has a lot of potential. I hope he finds a soft landing. I saw he tweeted out a picture of an emoji, a skiing emoji. So maybe he's visiting Deion Sanders in Colorado or somewhere up in the slopes. But I don't think he's going to end up at Iowa.
Yeah, and I also think from just reviewing past experiences and watching these type of situations unfold, that programs and coaches are typically much more apt to kind of see things through with an individual in which they've had a relationship with. The player's been on campus for 3 years. He's been on the roster. Okay, we're going to see it through. We trust them to a certain extent. We want to show some loyalty to see the process through versus, hey, we just signed this guy. He hasn't even attended class, come to practice, and, we just don't want to deal with it. And it doesn't look good. Not just from an optics standpoint, but the conclusion is not looking good, even if, as was the case, charges dismissed. We're not going to see it through with this individual like we would with one of our current players.
That's very possible. And let's take this one step further. If we're going to speculate, and again, we don't know exactly what happened, what didn't happen. But is it possible that Oregon was aware of the baggage that Iowa was aware of? And they said, we're going to roll the dice, but there is a no tolerance policy on this kid. And if he does anything, we're done. And this was enough to say, nope, we're done. That's it. That's possible. We just don't
Absolutely
know.
possible. Yes.
It's unfortunate because it sounded like, going back to December, it sounded like Cade McNamara had formed a relationship with this guy. And there was a good chance he was coming to Iowa at one time. That was the talk of the town. So it's unfortunate that all this happened. But in hindsight, I still got to give Kirk Ferentz credit because optics wise, regardless of what actually happened that prompted those criminal charges that were later dismissed, I think it still appears to be a safe, good decision for the program if you're Kirk.
Yeah, for a program that is basically a vast wasteland in the wide receiver room, needing talent to be able to, it very much gives the look that Kirk did his due diligence and sure, at first glance wanted Trayshawn Holden, then um, judge the situation is not worth the risk. Michigan football at the voice of college football says Corey rules. I smirked at this when I popped it on the screen because who is this? Well, it's basically me. I've got too many people running around that can log in under my handles that can type things whatever they want. This is basically me. This is my account.
Okay,
Not
thank you,
that I
Mark.
disagree with that, but there it is.
I appreciate the compliment. And by the way, it could just be somebody that took the logo and created a new username. It might not actually, you have to click on the actual.
It could be. I doubt it. I think it's our buddy Dez.
Yeah,
that would be my guess.
Thank you, Dez.
Iowa Hawkeyes live here, folks, every Tuesday with Corey. Make it on back next Tuesday. We're here at 4:30 Central Time. And of course, check out the Budkiss Award ceremony on BTN coming up at 7 Eastern, 6 Central. And again, we could really let this show could explode if you would go grab a few friends for next Tuesday, and we could build from there. Also, we want Corey's work to continue to expand. So what's coming up this week on From the Hawkeye of the Storm?
Big game tomorrow night with post-game coverage. And, people are on my site. You're probably not seeing it, or on my channel. You're probably not seeing a ton of daily football content. That will change as we get into spring. We'll get more content up. But right now, we're hitting basketball hard, post-game shows, a couple times a week. We've had different guests on the post-game show. We'll continue to do that as well, especially as we get closer to March. We're going to have some March Madness special coverage. We're working on maybe some bracketology show as we did last year. So lots of great stuff. Tomorrow's a big game in Madison. Bad weather. I was going to head up there for the game. It's like a 4.5 hour drive. Not worth it. And we've got projected ice and snow. I think about a foot of snow projected up in Minnesota. And so the players are getting there today. I think they're actually there now. And hopefully we can get the refs in there and get that game played. And then they can get home and prepare for a big game Saturday. But continuous post-game coverage on my channel. We'll have some podcasts coming up as well.
Have you ever seen this forecast very often? Here in beautiful Northeast Ohio, on Thursday, high of 70. Friday, high of 31.
That's pretty stark. I've seen that I saw that in Iowa like 4 years ago. We had a February day where it was like that. We were down in the 30s, and then the next day it was like 70, and then went right back down. That is weird, but that's sort of the Midwest for you.
Yep. All right, Corey, we appreciate it. And everybody get on over to Corey's channel, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, for Iowa basketball coverage. February frenzy, riding right into March Madness. And we'll see you back here, everyone, next Tuesday at 4:30 Central.